So, hello then, welcome back to yet another Night of the Movies podcast. I'm Spike Knight, and in this podcast, I like talking all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I'm reviewing The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. But, just before I do that, I should say what I say at the start of every podcast I do, which is, if you are watching this podcast on YouTube, hello to my viewers, but prefer to listen to your podcast on Spotify, well, let me look, as you can also listen to this podcast on Spotify at Night of the Movies on that platform. And if you are already listening to this podcast on Spotify, hello there to podcast listeners, then you can also check this podcast out visually. Yes, you can watch this podcast on my YouTube channel at Night of the Movies on that platform as well. Likewise, wherever you may be watching or listening to this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the podcast, of course, and please leave me with some feedback on things to improve on in future podcasts, because there are always things to improve on, and feedback is, as ever, much appreciated. So, let's get into it, shall we? The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. I'm continuing reviewing Peter Jackson's Middle-earth saga. So far, I've reviewed the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now it's time to give my thoughts on the Hobbit trilogy. And what better place to start with the first Hobbit film? So, The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. First things first, I should say, as with the Lord of the Rings films, I haven't read the Hobbit book. I haven't read the Lord of the Rings books, and I haven't read the Hobbit book properly. I have read, and a long time ago this was, but I did read the comic strip version of The Hobbit, but I barely remember anything about it. So if I get details or characters' names wrong in this podcast, in my view of this Hobbit film, then I do apologise, because all I know is what I've seen in these films. And also, I should say this. I absolutely love this film, and I love the Hobbit trilogy. I'm not going to be one of those YouTube channels that just criticises and talks about all the things wrong with the Hobbit films. Don't get me wrong, I have some issues with the Hobbit movies, and I will get onto that as I do these reviews, but I love them. And I mean, I don't love them as much as I love the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but they hold such a special place in my heart, particularly the first Hobbit movie, because this was the film that showed me what going to the cinema, that opened my eyes as to what going to cinema could be like. It opened my eyes up to the experiential event that watching movies at the cinema could be. Because before this film came out in 2012, I didn't really go to cinema that much. I've been to cinema, here and there, maybe once, if I was lucky, twice a year, but I hadn't really been to cinema that much because I didn't have a local cinema. My local cinema opened in 2016. I still remember going watching Rogue One and Christmas 2016, literally weeks after the cinema had opened. So I didn't have a local cinema when this film came out. I didn't go to cinema as much as I do now. But when the first Hobbit movie came out, because my family watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy every year, they watched it around Christmas. They watched it around the Christmas/New Year period of every year, and they still do now, and I watch it with them. Because my family was such big fans of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, they wanted to see The Hobbit at the cinema. They wanted to see the first Hobbit movie at the cinema. They were really, really excited to, and I was quite literally dragged along to the cinema with them. I did not want to see this film at all, because even though I love the Lord of the Rings trilogy now, I love those films to pieces, and my favourite trilogies of all time, I didn't love them growing up. I didn't love the Lord of the Rings films growing up because I hadn't seen them in a cinema. I think that was the biggest reason. I mean, I love the battle sequences in those films growing up. I love them so much. All the big battles, the Battle of Minas Tirith in the third Lord of the Rings film, the Battle of Helm's Deep in the second, but I just didn't love those films overall. And to be honest, I only really came to love the Lord of the Rings films the way I do now after seeing all three Hobbit movies, then rewatching Lord of the Rings films, and then I loved them even more after I watched all three Lord of the Rings films in the cinema last year, because I do think it is true that you haven't properly seen Lord of the Rings until you've seen them in the cinema. You haven't properly experienced Lord of the Rings, should I say, until you've experienced them in the cinema. However, I watch the Hobbit movies in the cinema first. So for me, this was my Lord of the Rings growing up. And this film in particular was my Fellowship of the Ring, because it introduced me into the world of Middle-earth in a way that hadn't been accessible to me up to that point. I never had the chance to see the Lord of the Rings films in the cinema before 2012. And then when I got the opportunity to see the first Hobbit movie in the cinema, I didn't want to at all. I was literally dragged to the cinema to go and watch this film, and then about 5-10 minutes into the movie, I was completely hooked and immersed into this world, and I absolutely loved this movie because it felt like an experience, and it opened my eyes up to what, watching a movie at the cinema could be like, to the experience of watching a movie at the cinema. Now if I watch this movie, if this movie came out nowadays, I don't think I'd love it. I think I'd like it, because one of the reasons I love this film is because I love spending time in Peter Jackson's Middle-earth. But at the same time, I don't think I would have loved it though if it came out now, because I've seen many films like this since, if you follow my thinking. A lot of CGI heavy films. But at the time, it was just what I needed. It was just what I needed to introduce me into what the cinematic experience could be like. And I remember after watching that first Hobbit movie at the cinema, I got excited to watch the second movie, the subsequent Christmas. I got excited to watch the third movie, the Christmas after that. And then I remember when the third movie was coming out, when the third Hobbit film was coming out, I was having these bittersweet emotions, because I was thinking, God, I'm so excited to see this movie, to see the conclusion to the Hobbit trilogy. But also, this might be the last time I get excited about going to the cinema. Luckily enough, the year after, the first Jurassic World film came out, and Star Wars Force Awakens came out, and those films made me fall in love with cinema even more. I mean, I have big criticisms with Jurassic World now, but at the time, it was what I needed. Still, though, it was the first Hobbit movie which really introduced me to the cinematic experience, which showed me what cinema could do, which opened my eyes to what going to the cinema could be like, and to the experience a great movie could behold, And I still remember watching this first Hobbit movie in the cinema and falling in love with it. I mean, it was a long film, and one of the reasons I really didn't want to go to cinema to see it was because I was going to be sat in a crowded cinema for 3 hours, and we had to travel an hour to go to the cinema. We went to a special cinema to go and see it, and I did not want to do that, but it was completely worth it. And even so it felt long, I didn't care. I was eating all of it up. I had a similar experience watching the latest Avatar. That film felt long, but I didn't care, because it was an experience. It was an experiential event, and that's what it was watching the first Hobbit movie for me. I mean, now, as I've said, I have problems with it, and it does not hold a candle to Fellowship of the Ring. I think Fellowship of the Ring is a perfect film, and I don't think this first Hobbit movie is. Still, whenever I rewatch it, and I've seen this film about 300 times, whenever I rewatch this first Hobbit movie, or any of the Hobbit movies for that matter, it takes me back to that time when I didn't really know what cinema could be like, what going to cinema could be like. I didn't have that luxury of being able to hop in a bus and be in a cinema, be at my local cinema within half an hour. I didn't have that luxury, so it takes me back to that time, where I was watching these movies, and they took me out of the times I was having, because I didn't always have the best time growing up. But watching these movies was the definition of escapism for me when I was younger. And I watch them now, it's a very nostalgic experience, because I still feel like a kid again in the cinema watching these movies for the first time when I rewatch them. And the fact that these films hold such a special place in my heart means that I will always love them. It's like the Whitney Houston song. Oh, sorry, it's actually a Dolly Parton song. I will always love you. I mean, I can't sing to save my life, and that was utterly embarrassing there. But still, you get the point I'm making. I will always love the Hobbit movies, regardless of how many faults I find with them now, because they opened my mind and my eyes up to what going to the cinema and experiencing a movie at the cinema could be like. Plus, I love them for so many other reasons. As I've already said, I love spending time in Peter Jackson's Middle-earth, and I love how this film takes time to tell its story. I don't care that the book that this film is based on is only one book, and it's a small book, and they extended the book into three-hour films, and there's even extended versions of these films. I don't care about that, because this film is wildly entertaining, in my opinion. And as I've already said, I love how I get to spend time in this world. You get to breathe in this film. There's breathing space, is what I meant to say. There's breathing space in this film with the narrative and the story that we go on with these characters. I love all that. I mean, not saying there's not breathing space in the Lord of the Rings films. No, especially when you get to the extended versions, which are the definitive versions of the Lord of the Rings films. Extended versions are the definitive versions, and anyone who says otherwise is just wrong. But not to say that these films, not to say that the Lord of the Rings films didn't have moments where they breathed, but at the same time, though, there's something about the Hobbit movies where I like getting to spend more time in this world, I love that about these films. And Peter Jackson, he doesn't just direct a film, he makes a movie. These are proper epic and expansive, and really... the money is on the screen in the way you want with a film like this. I don't know what the budget for this film was, but I dare say it was very expensive. And even now, I don't care about the CGI too much in this film, because it still looks great. It still looks better than most CGI in big budget movies nowadays. Even with the antagonist, Azog the Pale Orc, the CGI in his character never really bothered me, and it still doesn't really. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would have liked there to be a more practical version of that character, sure, but I also don't mind the fully CGI character. I think the CGI still looks good, and I don't know, it gives it a more fantastical look, if you know what I'm thinking. It gives you... I like the fact that Azog is a CGI orc, because he looks more fantastical. I would have preferred it to be more prosthetic, and if Peter Jackson had the time to really prep these films, I think it would have been a more prosthetic looking orc film, I think, and like the orcs look in the 3 Lord of the Rings films. But I don't mind it. I really don't mind it, and I don't mind the amount of CGI in this film, because it still looks great in my opinion. I don't mind that the film looks a bit more shinier and gleamier because they changed the frame rate from the Lord of the Rings films. I don't care about all that, because again, these films hold such a special place in my heart, and also I love the characters. I really love the characters in this film. I love Martin Freeman as a young Bilbo Baggins, because at times it doesn't feel like he's taking it completely seriously. He doesn't feel like he's taking the role completely seriously, but then there's other times when it feels like Martin Freeman is giving it his all, and the performance works perfectly. You completely believe him as a young Bilbo Baggins, and he's not doing an Ian Holm impression. Ian Holm, who played the old Bilbo Baggins in the Lord of the Rings trilogy and reprised his role in the first and third Hobbit movies, it doesn't feel like he was just doing an impression of a young Ian Holm, and I really like that. And I watched this at a time where I was also watching the BBC Sherlock series, which, Martin Freeman is in, alongside Benedict Cumberbatch. Benedict Cumberbatch has a role in these movies. He plays Smaug, and, well, yeah, he does play Smaug, actually. I was about to say he voices Smaug. No, he does play Smaug. If you watch the behind-the-scenes features on these Hobbit movies, you can see really throws himself into the role of Smaug, very similar to how Andy Serkis played Gollum in the Lord of the Rings films, and again how he played them here in this film. And also he did voice the Necromancer, which is the evil... Would I say wizard? It's this evil sorcerer. That's what I meant to say. The evil sorcerer. I couldn't think of the word because I'm recording this dead early in the morning. But anyway, yeah. Benedict Cumberbatch plays 2 roles, and of course Benedict Cumberbatch plays Sherlock in the BBC Sherlock series, and alongside Benedict Cumberbatch in the Sherlock series is Martin Freeman as John Watson. I watched the BBC Sherlock series around the same time. I was watching it for the first time around the same time that I watched the first Hobbit movie for the first time. A lot of firsts there, wasn't there? And then I watched, watching Martin Freeman in this, I was like, oh, God, he's a great actor, and he quickly became one of my favourite actors after watching him in Sherlock and watching him as Bilbo Baggins at the same time in this film. Yeah, I think Martin Freeman is perfect as Bilbo Baggins, and anyone who says otherwise, I don't want to hear about it. You know, I love Martin Freeman, perfectly cast. I particularly love the line that Ian Holmes says when he's narrating at the start of the film. You know, narrating what he's writing in his book to Frodo. He says, "I'm not the same Hobbit I used to be." What a perfect line of dialogue. I'm not the same Hobbit I used to be. Perfect. And then you have this drawing of, you know, Martin Freeman's Bilbo Baggins at the same time. It's great. I don't know what else people wanted from this film. Anyway, continuing with the performances and the characters, Richard Armitage as Thorin. Recently I did hear that Brian Blessed, which is an interesting casting choice, was originally going to play Thorin if Guillermo del Toro directed this film, and I'll get on to the original version of The Hobbit that was meant to happen but never did a bit later in this podcast. But originally, Brian Blessed was going to play Thorin. Although I think Richard Armitage is great as Thorin, he's magnetic, and he brings his presence with him whenever he's on screen as the character, as this dwarf lord. Is he a dwarf lord? But you get the point I'm making. As this dwarf which everybody trusts. I want to see the film. I want to see the version of The Hobbit where Brian Blessed plays Thorin. That would have been a very different film, and a film which, I mean, I don't know if it would have worked, but I want to see it. Still, going back onto what I was saying, Richard Armitage is great as Thorin, and he brings his presence to the film, and I think all the dwarfs are really, really well cast. Plus, I love how all the dwarfs have different relationships with one another, and I love how none of the dwarfs are the same. Each dwarf that we meet in this film is a different character. None of them act the same way, and they all have their own unique things about them. You know, one of them's got an axe in the head and they can't speak. One of them is not too bright. You know, I think the one that's not too bright is called Owen. One of them's played by James Nesbitt, and he's got a funny hat. One of them is Gimli's father. You know, one of them can't hear well, so he has a little thing in his ear. If you've seen the films, you know what I mean. Each dwarf has their own little thing about them. I explained it awfully there, but I love how each dwarf is different. I mean, I don't know if that's in the books or not. I can't remember. I should have said the one book, because even so there's 3 Hobbit movies, there's only one Hobbit book. But still, I love how each dwarf has their own thing about them, and none of them are the same, and they all have different relationships with one another, because that's what it's like in, you know, your friendship circles or your family circles. You have a different relationship with a different member of your family or a different friend. I have that all the time. My closest friends, I speak to them differently than I speak to the other friend, if you follow my thinking. And that's what you get with the dwarfs in this film. And they're all a merry bunch, aren't they? You know, I think that's like even a line that Gandalf says in the film. They're all quite a merry bunch when you get to know them. It's something like that. I butchered the line there, but you get the point I'm making. You love all the dwarf characters. You know, I remember watching this film for the first time in the cinema, and when they were all showing up at the Shire, they were all showing up at Bilbo's door, and they just keep coming through. And I remember watching the film for the first time and thinking, there can't be more dwarfs. Oh no, wait, there is. You know how many characters? There's 14 on the company that go to take back Erebor. I love all the dwarfs. I've got them all in Lego back there. I don't care what anyone says. They're all brilliant. And I would not sacrifice any one of them for this film. I would not take away any one of the dwarfs in this film whatsoever. Also, I have to mention Ian McKellen, Sir Ian McKellen back, should I say. Sir Ian McKellen back as Gandalf the Grey. Not the same Gandalf that we saw in Two Towers and Return of the King, but the same Gandalf that we saw in The Fellowship of the Ring, because obviously these films are set before the first Lord of the Rings film. I really, really love Ian McKellen in these films, and I love how he got more time, he got more screen time. Because although he's in the Lord of the Rings films a lot, watching Two Towers recently, he wasn't in as much as that. He wasn't in that as much as I initially thought he was. He's in a lot of Return of the King and he's in a lot of Fellowship, but I love how he gets his own storyline in these 3 films. I mean, the storyline, he had his own storyline more in the second 2 Hobbit movies, now that I think about it. It's been about a week since I saw this film, and I have slept since rewatching it recently, but I love how he got more screen time, and it feels like Ian McKellen has never, ever left the role of Gandalf when he comes back to play him here. I know that Ian McKellen did have problems playing Gandalf, and he said he found filming the Hobbit movies miserable. He has spoken about that, and I have watched this video. It was on the special features on the first Hobbit film, where when they're doing all the dwarfs at Bilbo's house and Gandalf's there too, Ian McKellen as Gandalf is filming the scene in a separate set to all the dwarf actors and to Martin Freeman playing Bilbo, so they could get the sizes right. They weren't doing it like they did in the first Lord of the Rings film, where it's all forced perspective, it's camera trickery. Here, they were just doing it where they filmed in two different sets at the same time and then they put the sets together. It's something like that. I'm probably explaining it awfully, but it's something like they put the two sets together. But that meant that Ian McKellen was on a different set than all the other actors. And he was on this complete green screen set. And he breaks down whilst filming this scene as Gandalf in Hobbiton, and he breaks down and he says, "This is not why I became an actor." And it's a really heartbreaking thing to watch on the special features, and a lot of people are going on about this now. I just saw a YouTube short the other day, somebody talking about it and saying that's the reason these films don't work, and it is a fact that this did happen. Ian McKellen did break down the set of The Hobbit. That being said, people also forget what happened next, and I've seen the special features and I remember this. Peter Jackson was behind the camera when they were shooting the scene, and everybody was there. All the crew was there when they were shooting the scene, and they throw Ian McKellen a party after he's had this really terrible day on set to cheer him up. And also, people got to remember that Ian McKellen speaks very highly of Peter Jackson. He doesn't say anything bad about Peter Jackson as a filmmaker, and I think Peter Jackson is really somebody who tries to make everyone's experience the best. And he probably saw Ian McKellen was having this really terrible time on the set of The Hobbit and tried to make an experience the best as possible. Yes, he got angry because he was dealing with green screen a lot, but also, I don't think it changed the fact that I do reckon Ian McKellen had a good time making these films, actually. I really reckon he had a good time, because if you watch all the behind-the-scenes features, he seemed to be getting along with Orlando Bloom when he was on set for the second two films, or Luke Evans when he played Bard in the second two films, and he seems to be getting along with a lot of the actors when he's on set. When he's on the set with them, you know, Hugo Weaving, when Hugo Weaving came back as Elrond in this film, he seemed to be getting along with him quite a lot, and also he gives an incredible performance in these films too, and I don't think he would have given an incredible performance if he wasn't at least enjoying himself a little bit, and at the very least didn't have faith in the project. I mean, it's Ian McKellen, so I think he's one of those actors where he could read the phone book and I think people would be interested. But still, and there's just, yeah, I think he had a good time with The Hobbit. I mean, I don't know for certain, and I have seen the behind the scenes stuff which says otherwise, but still, everybody has a bad day at the office. And I think people are just blowing up the fact that Ian McKellen had a bit of a bad time in The Hobbit, because I don't think it was totally a bad time, though. Did he have as good a time as he did in the Lord of the Rings films? Probably no. But still, he speaks very highly of Peter Jackson, and he gives one incredible performance in this film. He gives an incredible performance in all three Hobbit movies. He really does. And I really love seeing him back. He feels like he never left the role of Gandalf the Grey, should I say. Gandalf the Grey. Because he is slightly different than Gandalf the White, which we see in the second two Lord of the Rings films. And anyway, going on to other returning actors, we see Hugo Weaving return as Elrond, which I just briefly spoke about. I was about to say Lady Galadriel returning as Lady Galadriel. Now we see Cate Blanchett return as Lady Galadriel, and Christopher Lee return as Saruman. I remember when that happened in the cinema, when Christopher Lee came out as Saruman in the film, in the scene where it's a Council of Elrond. It's not the Council of Elrond, that's the first Lord of the Rings film. But they're talking to Elrond. It's the White Council, that's what I think it's called. And throughout Rivendell, Saruman comes into the scene. I remember people gasping in the cinema when that happened. People were like, because obviously Saruman is this terrifying villain in the first two Lord of the Rings films. But of course, this is before the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But I remember people thinking, oh my god, it's going to be the same Saruman. It's going to be the same evil Saruman. But then you realise, oh no, this is when Saruman is good. You know, I'm seeing Christopher Lee back as Saruman. And this was not long before he passed away, if I remember correctly. But yeah, so seeing the late, great Christopher Lee back as Saruman was just a great addition to this film. They didn't need to get him back because, as far as I'm aware, he's not in the book from what I've read. But who cares? It's Christopher Lee as Saruman. Who doesn't want to see him back? And he's not in this film much, and apparently he wasn't even on the same set as the actors. He filmed his part in the UK, the other actors filmed their parts in New Zealand, where the rest of the film was shot. But the fact that Peter Jackson and his crew brought the late great Sir Christopher Lee back to the film is wonderful, in my opinion. It's a wonderful addition. I love seeing Cate Blanchett back as Galadriel, because from someone like me who hasn't read the Lord of the Rings books, she's not really in the Lord of the Rings films that much. She has a couple of scenes in Fellowship. She's in two scenes in Return of the King. And I think she has a moment in Two Towers, if I remember correctly. Yeah, she shares a a telepathic elf moment with, don't know what I'm doing with my hand, but she shares a telepathic elf moment with Elrond in Two Towers, but she's not in the films that much, and I liked how these films have her a bit more in, because it gives me more time with Cate Blanchett as Lady Galadriel. I can't keep mispronouncing her name, as Lady Galadriel. I think that's how I pronounce it. And she just oozes this essence every single time she's on screen. Great casting. Hugo Weaving back as Elrond, love seeing him there too. So loved seeing all those actors come back, as well as Elijah Wood as Frodo Baggins and Ian Holm as old Bilbo Baggins at the start of the film. Ian Holm had retired from acting when this film was in production. If I get my facts correct, he retired from acting, but Peter Jackson got him back out of retirement, or Ian Holm decided to come back out of retirement to finish his role for The Hobbit, so there'd be that sense of continuity, which I really like. I really like how Ian Holm came back out of retirement, even though he was suffering with dementia. Apologies if I got that wrong, but he was suffering with an illness at the time, which meant that his memory was not great, and Peter Jackson had to tell him all the lines. But I love that he came back though, because it does add that sense of continuity, and it's wonderful seeing him back, and I love how he narrates the start of the film. I also love how we got to see Elijah Wood back as Frodo. Frodo lives. It's that nice, sweet addition that you get after watching Return of the King. You see Frodo and Bilbo go away, and then you realise, if you watch this in the order of the film, if you watch this in the order the films came out, it's like, oh, they came back to Hobbiton. If you follow my thinking there, I'm not sure how much I'm making sense, because my head is all over the place right now. But yeah, I really love seeing all those actors back, and I really love seeing so much of the new cast. One person I haven't spoken about yet, Sylvester McCoy as Radagast the Brown. I know a lot of people know Sylvester McCoy as the Seventh Doctor, and I have seen a bit of his Doctor episodes, and he seems good as a Doctor. Haven't watched, I don't think, any of his episodes in full, but I like him as a Doctor. For me, though, he will always be Radagast the Brown. If I ever get to see Sylvester McCoy at Comic-Con, which I really want to, it's on my bucket list, I just want to say I love you in The Hobbit, because I really love him as Radagast the Brown. I love the way that character's introduced. And Sylvester McCoy plays him perfectly. I wish we got to see Sylvester McCoy more, But I love his casting, especially because, from what I read, Peter Jackson is a fan of Doctor Who. So, two fandoms coming together there for him. Tolkien and Doctor Who coming together for the character of Radagast the Brown. Also, Graham McTavish for the role of Dwalin. What a name, Graham McTavish. I haven't really seen him much else, although I know he's been cast in stuff which is similar to this. Like, I've seen a bit of Outlander. He's in Outlander. Also, he had a small role in House of the Dragon. He's great as Dwalin, and I love Ken Scott, if I remember correctly, if I got the actor's name correct there, as Balin, his brother. I think all the cast do a really great job. One person who's returning from the Lord of the Rings trilogy I forgot to mention, Andy Serkis back as Gollum. Love Andy Serkis, one of my favourite actors, and seeing him back as Gollum, one of my favourite performances ever. I think Andy Serkis as Gollum in Return of the King is one of the best supporting performances I've seen in a film, period. And I think him in this film alongside Martin Freeman's Bilbo Baggins in the riddle scene is some of the most enthralling cinema I've ever seen. I know for some people it's probably not that special or anything, but when I remember watching that riddle scene in the cinema for the first time and not believing what I was seeing, I couldn't get over it, you know. I don't know why, I just couldn't get over that scene. I was completely caught up and absorbed in it. And even so, now I watch the scene with a slightly different perspective, it still takes me back to that time when I watched it the first time, and it's still so enthralling because of Andy Serkis' performance as Gollum, which is so on point. I love the riddle scene, and I love seeing Andy Serkis back as Gollum. On the topic of Gollum, somebody who appeared in the Lord of the Rings films, I'm going to try and do a link here, but I think I'm going to fail miserably. These films share some similarities to the Lord of the Rings films. Or should I say, this film shares some similarities to the Fellowship of the Ring. I think the link was alright, actually. I think the link worked okay. Yes, this film, at times, this is probably my biggest criticism, although it's not a huge criticism, but at times this film does feel like it wants to be Fellowship of the Ring all over again. It feels like Peter Jackson and his crew are trying to make another Fellowship of the Ring. Even to the point that at the start of the film, you've got a prologue with narration from a certain important character. Then as the film goes on, you've got these characters going on this adventure, which shows all the characters walking along these vast New Zealand landscapes and these picturesque shots. And then as the film goes on, they go to Rivendell, which you see happen in the first Lord of the Rings film as well. Furthermore, later on in the film, you see the characters get lost under the ground in tunnels, and a goblin tunnel similar to the Mines of Moria in the first Lord of the Rings film. The finale of this film even takes place in a forest with orcs. Very similar. Well, it's not a forest, it's on the cliff edge, but it's around trees, similar to the finale to Fellowship of the Ring. It does feel at times like Peter Jackson and his crew were trying to make another Lord of the Rings film, and on rewatch, that's probably the thing which bothers me the most, because really I think they should have done something different and not try to recreate that magic. It doesn't bother me that much, but it's one thing I do really want to mention. I do wonder sometimes, and I haven't read up on this, there may be an easy answer out there on Google, and if you do know the answer, please let me know in the comment section below. But it really feels like maybe the studio wanted another Lord of the Rings and were telling Peter Jackson to do that, to try and recreate the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the success of the Lord of the Rings trilogy with the Hobbit trilogy. Because I don't know if it was Peter Jackson who wanted to do this. I don't know if Peter Jackson wanted to do another Lord of the Rings trilogy. In fact, if you watch the behind the scenes features on Return of the King, he says there, I will not do another, I will never do this again. And he basically ended up doing it all over again, you know. And I think there's no one else who could have, by the way. I really think there's no one else who could have. Still, I do wonder sometimes if it was Jackson's decision, if it was Peter Jackson's decision to make these films like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, or whether it was the studio going, we want to do another Lord of the Rings, you make these films like Lord of the Rings and try and recapture the success that those films had. Because these films didn't manage to, and I do think maybe that was one of the reasons. Because particularly with Fellowship, particularly with the first Hobbit movie, not so much with the second two, not so much with Desolation and Battle of the Five Armies, but particularly with An Unexpected Journey, it feels like it's trying to recapture the magic of the first Lord of the Rings film and do many of the same plot points and go to similar sort of locations, and I'm not sure if it all works. But that's kind of my own, that's really my biggest criticism. I mean, yeah, there's a little too much CGI at times, but that doesn't really bother me nowadays, because it's better CGI than we see in movies, you know, nowadays. When I rewatch these movies now, I don't care about the CGI, because it looked better than CGI in most movies. Hopefully I made my point clear there, but yeah. And continuing on with the whole idea behind these movies, you know, what they were planning to do with these films. Originally, Guillermo del Toro, director of such films as Pan's Labyrinth, Shape of Water. He won an Oscar for Shape of Water, Pacific Rim, the Hellboy films with Ron Perlman. He's quite a famous director. He's done a lot of things now. Yeah, Guillermo del Toro is a really phenomenal filmmaker. I love him. I can't wait to see his Frankenstein film coming out in the next couple of years. He was meant to make the Hobbit films, but he was originally going to make them as 2 films. I watched a video on this recently, so let's see how well I can get the facts correct here. He was originally going to make them as 2 films. He wanted James McAvoy to star as Bilbo Baggins. He wanted the likes of Brian Blessed as Thorin, as I already spoke about. Ian McShane, he wanted as one of the dwarfs, which could have worked. I like Ian McShane as an actor. That could have worked quite well. And he was just going to make it into 2 films. And he was going to use a lot more prosthetics. Not focus on CGI as much, but use a lot more prosthetics for the likes of Azog, the Pale Orc, more specifically. You know, the main orc antagonist. He was going to do that as a prosthetic. You know, he was going to make the look of the orcs more prosthetic, like Laws does in Fellowship of the Ring. You know, that's the orc that kills Boromir in Fellowship of the Ring. The Pale Orc was going to look more like Laws. I think that's what that orc's called that kills Boromir in Fellowship of the Ring. Get the point I'm making. A lot of the film was going to be more prosthetic, and instead it was going to be 2 Hobbit movies, and there wasn't going to be any battle. You know, unlike Peter Jackson, who made the 3rd Hobbit movie all about the Battle of the Five Armies, the Battle of the Five Armies would have been completely missed in Peter Jackson's, not in Peter Jackson's version, in Guillermo del Toro's version of The Hobbit. But that version never happened, and instead, we got Peter Jackson's version. Now, I don't care about what could have been, personally. And the only reason I mentioned it is because a lot of people mention what could have been with the Hobbit movies, what should have been if Guillermo del Toro made them. But as good as a filmmaker I think Guillermo del Toro is, I really think he's an amazing filmmaker. A couple of years ago, he made one of my favourite films of the past couple of years. What's it called? Came out in 2021. Nightmare Alley. That was one of my favourite films of that year. He is a really phenomenal filmmaker. I don't like what I've heard about his vision for the Hobbit movies, though. I would have liked there to be a more prosthetic-looking orc for the main villain. That might have worked better. Everything else doesn't sound like it would have worked better, though, for me. Originally, on Guillermo del Toro's version, he wanted Bilbo to be knocked out before the Battle of the Five Armies and wake up after the battle ended, which apparently is what happens in the books. But I don't think that would have worked because these films build up to the battle. You know, the battle between Thorin and the dwarves and the orcs and the elves and all of that, which happens in the 3rd Hobbit film. And I don't think it would have worked if Bilbo just... I mean, he does get knocked out in the battle in the 3rd Hobbit film anyway, but the battle, you still see the battle take place. And I just don't think it would have worked. And again, as much as I like Guillermo del Toro, and as much as his vision probably would have worked, and probably would have worked very well because he's a very good filmmaker, I'm happy with the versions that we got. And I'm not one of these people who likes dwelling on what could have been. Let's just look at what we got, and let's be happy with that. That's what I try, and if you're not happy with that, then that's completely fair. But don't dwell on what almost was, because if you watch the behind the scenes, or even just watch there's these video blogs on Peter Jackson's YouTube channel on YouTube. Yes, he does actually have his own YouTube channel. You can still see all these video blogs from the making of The Hobbit. You see the amount of work, effort, blood, sweat and tears that went into making these 3 films. And it feels like a lot of people just discredit all of that because Guillermo del Toro could have made the Hobbit films. Again, Guillermo del Toro is a great filmmaker. But I love Peter Jackson's vision for these films, so I don't care. I think the most unfortunate thing with Peter Jackson's vision for these films is that it's not completely what he wanted. Because Guillermo del Toro was attached to the project and was doing so much pre-production on the project for so long. When he left, they were still trying to make these release dates, which meant that Peter Jackson had to really swiftly move from his work on the Adventures of Tintin, which he was doing with Spielberg, to the first Hobbit movie remarkably quick. Like, very fast. And he only had 6 months of prep on all 3 Hobbit movies, in comparison to, and this is true, 4 years of prep he had on all 3 Lord of the Rings films. That is quite a big difference. 4 years of prep on Lord of the Rings, 6 months of prep on the Hobbit films. And I think that's the saddest thing about these movies, even though I love the Hobbit trilogy. If Peter Jackson did have more time to work, to prep on these films, God knows how good they really could have been. God knows how more amazing they could have been. I mean, they're amazing to me now still, don't get me wrong. But the thought of Peter Jackson having 4 years to prep on the Hobbit movies and then being on par with the Lord of the Rings films is a dream. And even so, I really love the Hobbit films. There is a part of me which wishes we got... I don't even know how much I'm making sense anymore, I've got to admit right now, because my head is spinning. But there's a part of me which really wishes that Peter Jackson had that prep time, because it would have probably made these films better. I love them. I really love them. But the fact he only had 6 months of prep compared to 4 years of prep on Lord of the Rings, I don't know. It's sad. And, you know, Peter Jackson has said that he never felt on top of things whilst making the Hobbit movies, and that he winged a lot of it. And here's my response to Peter Jackson saying that he winged a lot of the Hobbit movies. If that is the case, which wouldn't surprise me, because as we mentioned, you know, he had 6 months of prep on these films. If that was the case, it shows you how good of a filmmaker Peter Jackson is, because these films are still so well directed and move at a pace and have this vision to them that so many blockbusters nowadays, that so many big budget blockbusters at that nowadays do not have. And the fact that Peter Jackson apparently winged it on all 3 of these films tells you how good of a filmmaker he is. Because with these films, regardless of what you think of them in terms of quality, you cannot deny that the money is on the screen, and you cannot deny that there's been so much work put into these films, in the costume design, the set designs, and the CGI work, which does take a lot of time, and in the direction and in the vision that is brought to life. You cannot deny the work that we put into these films, and the fact that apparently Peter Jackson wings it tells you how good he is as a filmmaker, how good he was as a filmmaker, should I say, because these films are wildly entertaining in my opinion. And if Peter Jackson winged it directing these films, he is a bloody damn good filmmaker then. He is a legendary filmmaker even, you know. Pun intended for those who understand what the pun is. I don't know, even I understand what the pun is. Actually, no, I do understand because I made the pun. But still, you get the point I'm making. Yeah, I think Peter Jackson did a very, very good job with making these films. Also, I have to mention the musical score. Howard Shore is back composing the musical score. He composed the score for all 3 Lord of the Rings films. He composed the score for all 3 Hobbit movies too. It feels like he's never left. His score for the first Hobbit movie is really... I mean, it's perfect again. I love all the musical elements too. I love that the dwarves have moments where they sing, you know. They've got the blunt the knives, burn the forks. I don't remember the rest of the song, but I love all that in Hobbiton. And then they also sing Misty Mountains at Hobbiton as well. These do the far over the misty mountains call, 3 dungeons deep. I can't remember the rest of the song, but I love all the musical elements because it makes these films feel more playful than the Lord of the Rings films. I like the serious nature and the end of the world type feel of the Lord of the Rings films, but I also like the playful feel of the Hobbit movies. You know, a lot of people have compared them to the Star Wars prequels. I have heard many people compare the Hobbit trilogy to the Star Wars prequel trilogy, saying that these films are meant for kids, and you can tell that. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Maybe because I watched these films when I was a kid, when I was much younger, and so these films just clicked that note with me. And I do think for a lot of people, and I've spoken to people who did have this experience, this is their introduction to Middle-earth. It was my introduction to Middle-earth, really. It was my proper introduction to Peter Jackson's Middle-earth, and I've spoken to people who also said the same thing, who also said that these films, that in particular the first Hobbit movie, was their introduction to Middle-earth, and the people I've spoken to are people about my age, or people who are a bit younger, and who love the musical elements. And I know people complain about them and say, well, the Lord of the Rings films weren't musical. First of all, they do have songs in the Lord of the Rings films. I remember the song that Pippin sings in Return of the King. Yes, it's not on the same... Yes, it's a very different sort of song that is, that you hear sung in this film, but still, there is a kind of musical element in Return of the King. Also, Aragorn sings, doesn't he, at that one point? But I don't care that the dwarves sing. I really don't care. And apparently it's in the books too, so I don't understand what people have problems with when the dwarves sang in this film. And it adds a playful nature to their relationships, and it shows how much fun they are. And it adds this chalk and cheese relationship with them and Bilbo as well, because when they're singing Blunt the Knives, blunt the knives, burn the dogs, and all that, you see Bilbo, no, stop that, no, and you get this chalk and cheese relationship going on between them, and it shows you how in tune they are with one another. I love the musical elements, and even on the extended edition, there were more musical elements. Yes, there was an extended edition for this film, which I will get onto very briefly in this podcast. Even on the extended edition, and on the extended edition, there's more musical numbers. There's another musical number with the dwarves when they're at Rivendell. And the Goblin King gets a musical number where he gets all the goblin stuff later on in the film. I forgot what it is now. It's something like, you'll die down here and never be found down the depths of Goblin Town. Honestly, look it up on YouTube if you don't believe me. After watching this review, of course, after watching this podcast, go and look up the Goblin King song on YouTube. It exists. It's in the extended version of this film. I don't love the extended version, I've got to admit. The extended version of the first Hobbit film, unlike the extended versions for the Lord of the Rings films, are not the definitive version in my opinion. The extended version of this film is not the definitive version. Although the extended version has its moments, and if you're someone like me who likes spending time in Peter Jackson's Middle-earth, in the world that these films are set in, you might get something out of the extended version. I would recommend watching it, especially if you've been a fan of the Hobbit trilogy and you haven't seen the extended versions, and you haven't seen the extended version of this film. That being said, for me, the best version of this film is the theatrical version, because the theatrical version moves at a pace, and the extended version, although the elements it adds aren't bad, they feel unnecessary. There is this whole bit in the extended version at Rivendell where you see, and this is not a joke, and I'm not making this up, but if you don't believe me, go and look it up after I've said it. In the extended version of the first Hobbit movie, you see this bit of Rivendell where all the dwarves are washing each other in a fountain and they're all naked. You don't see anything explicit, obviously, but still, it's a moment which isn't really needed. There's more of Rivendell in the extended version which isn't necessarily needed. And there's a lot of things like that in the extended version of this first Hobbit movie. There's more in the Shire with Martin Freeman's Bilbo Baggins, where he's on the lookout for Gandalf. That stuff isn't necessarily needed as well. And there's more about Azog and his relationship with the Necromancer and the rise of evil in Middle-earth. That stuff isn't bad, but it isn't necessarily needed. And there's more in the Goblin tunnels. As what he said, you get the Goblin King has a musical number, but isn't necessarily needed. I think a lot of the extended stuff slows the film down. That being said, there's one extended addition to this film which I really admire, and that's when you see Martin Freeman's Bilbo Baggins walking around Rivendell, and he's looking at all the set design there. He's looking at Rivendell, but it's a set design really, and he sees his painting of the battle for the One Ring in the prologue of the first Lord of the Rings film, and in the painting is Sauron. He's Sauron fighting the elves, and I really like that addition. The rest of the additions in the extended edition, they're not bad, but they're not needed. And the definitive edition of the first Hobbit movie is the theatrical cut, is the original cut. However, I have a different opinion about the extended editions to the second two Hobbit movies, because each Hobbit film, yes, much like Lord of the Rings films, each Hobbit movie has extended editions. And I'll talk about this in more detail when I get onto my thoughts on the second two Hobbit movies. But I think the extended edition to Desolation of Smaug is needed to a degree. I got onto that in more detail when I talk about that film in more detail not too long ago. Not in the future on this channel. And I think that the extended edition to the third Hobbit movie, to Battle of the Five Armies, is certainly needed. And I'll talk about that in a lot more detail when I talk about that third Hobbit movie in the forthcoming days to weeks on this channel. But as for the first Hobbit movie, the extended stuff, it's not bad if you're a fan of these films. There's more to indulge in, and I dare say you can get the scenes online on YouTube or wherever. But they're not needed, and they don't necessarily add to the rich experience of these films, unlike the way that the extended stuff adds to the richer experience of the Lord of the Rings films. So I don't mind the extended edition, and whenever we watch the first Hobbit movie in my house, we watch the extended edition, but I just don't think it's, mandatory viewing, unlike the extended edition to the Lord of the Rings films. I'm pretty sure people understand my point there. I said it for about the 7th time. But yes, I don't think the extended edition to the first Hobbit movie is the definitive edition. Is that everything then? I've been going on for so long now, but you get the point I'm making. I love this film, and I don't care about its problems, really. I don't care that they were trying to do another Fellowship of the Ring with this film. I don't care about that at all, because for me, it's such a nostalgic film that is the definition of an escapism. That is the definition of escapism. Even with all the problems I'm facing in my personal life now, and I don't face many problems, but whenever I get worried about something, around the time that I'm watching these films every Christmas or New Year, and I put on the first Hobbit movie, it completely takes my mind off the day that I'm having, or the issues that might be going on in my mind at the time. It completely takes my mind away from them, and I'm back in Middle-earth. And I love Martin Freeman's Bilbo Baggins. I love seeing Sir Ian McKellen back as Gandalf, and Sir Christopher Lee back as Sam, and Sir Ian Holm back as old Bilbo Baggins, and seeing all these people, seeing the actors come back to play these roles. I love Peter Jackson directing, something I've mentioned yet. Somehow I haven't mentioned him, so I've been going on, let's see, how long with this podcast already? Haven't been timing it. So something I haven't even mentioned yet is how Peter Jackson changes atmosphere throughout the film. I really love that. There's just so much about this film that I love. I don't care about all the problems. I don't care that it's not as good as the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It doesn't need to be as good as the Lord of the Rings trilogy or Fellowship of the Ring, because it will always hold a special place in my heart for opening my mind up and opening my eyes up to what the cinematic experience could be, to the experiential event of watching movies at the cinema, and what it was like for me watching this movie for the first time. For the first time watching this film in 2012 and going, oh, I get it. I get why people go to the cinema. They go to the cinema to get experiences like this. And I hadn't had that any other movie. And I still haven't had that same experience that I had with the first Hobbit movie with any movie nowadays. I love going to cinema. I still get many, I still go to cinema and have many experiences there, with films like Oppenheimer last year, or Barbie last year, or Saltburn even last year. I still go to cinema now and I have those experiences, but not the same way I had an experience with the first Hobbit movie. God, I love it. And so if you can hear Saw in the background right now, there's somebody doing work downstairs in the house, so there might be some noise interference, and I do apologise about that, but yeah, the experience of watching this first Hobbit movie in the cinema will always hold a special place in my heart, and therefore the movie will always hold a special place in my heart as well. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, I'm going to say that it's a 10 out of 10. Yes, give me a second. Got Bilbo's sword, or is it Frodo's sword? Do they have the same sword? I can't remember. I think they do. Yes, I've got Bilbo's sword to celebrate the fact that I'm giving this first Hobbit movie a 10 out of 10. I'm so happy that I am. And even got my own ring here to celebrate as well. You know, this is my brother's ring that I'm wearing today, and this is my one ring. And I got all this, well, that isn't even mine, actually, it's my brother's sword, but me and my brother, we got all this because we're such big fans of the Middle-earth saga, and we are fans of the Hobbit movies as well, you know. I love this film. I love all the effort put into this film, as I already mentioned briefly. I love all the costume design, the production design. Love it all. Love the musical score by Howard Shore. It is perfect. Love how he riffs off the Misty Mountains theme throughout a lot of the film. You know, boom, boom, boom. Bum bum ba-da-dum bum bum. I love how this film also, much like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, uses New Zealand as Middle Earth. Love all that, and I just love this film. Love it. I said about 1,000 times, but I'm going to say it once more because of how much I adore this film. And last but not least, I love how we get a small glimpse of Smaug at the very end of this film. I love that. Although the very end of this film is very similar to the ending of Fellowship of the Ring, where at the end of Fellowship of the Ring, you see Sam and Frodo looking out onto Mount Doom because their quest is only beginning. And at the very end of this film, you see Bilbo, Gandalf the Grey, and all the dwarves looking out onto Erebor. And it's a very similar ending. Again, reinforcing the fact they're trying to make Fellowship of the Ring again, but I don't really care. I love this film, I really do, and I love the ending. Yeah. As we said about 1,000 times in this review, I love this film because it opened up my eyes to what the cinema experience could be, and so for that reason, I'm going to say once more that The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey is a 10 out of 10 from me. Anyway guys, that's it for today's podcast. If you have seen The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. And also let me know your thoughts on your favourite Hobbit movie in the comment section below as well. Whatever your thoughts are on the first Hobbit film and also the other Hobbit movies, let me know in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching or listening to this podcast. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this podcast. I look forward to many more podcasts coming very, very soon on this channel. As what I said, and I'm going to say it once more, thank you to all for watching or listening to this podcast. And I suppose this is it. Yeah, somehow we finally got to the end, so I suppose this is it. And I will see you guys again soon. But bye for now. Bye.